Mario Kart doesn't get better than full-on chaotic Grand Prix, I think we can all agree on that. But it's not for a lack of trying. Especially during the DS and Wii era, Nintendo started experimenting with ways to give Mario Kart more single-player legs. It seems like the final conclusion was that online capabilities were all that was needed, seeing as that's all that Mario Kart 7 and 8 offered, and did very well for themselves. But during their experimental phase, the developers tried out more unconventional formats. Mario Kart DS had a mission mode, which is quite forgotten as well, but can at least be played as easily as it is to boot up your copy of the game. The same cannot be said for Mario Kart Wii's variant, the Wi-Fi tournaments held on the Mario Kart channel, which, with the shutdown of the Wii Wi-Fi connection, can no longer be accessed or updated. Which is exactly why we're diving into this last mode, to make sure it remains a part of Mario history. This all started in May 2008, only a few weeks after Mario Kart released, depending on where you're located. Many of the game's secondary online functions were only found on the Mario Kart channel, which could only be downloaded if you owned a copy of the game. When I say secondary functions, I don't mean stuff like online racing, but instead things like leaderboards, statistics, ghost data and tournaments. 2 times a month you could download these events to your game, which changed up the core mechanic of Mario Kart in interesting ways while retaining the tracks that were already in the game. Sometimes, literally the only thing retained from the core Mario Kart experience was the goal of completing the mission as fast as possible. Not all of these tournaments were that special though. Hell, the majority is of a simpler variety. A common type was driving through numbered gates on familiar courses, like Koopa Cape, DK Summit and GBA Bowser's Castle. Collecting coins in a certain closed-off area also appeared quite often. This was usually not the entire race course, but only a part of it. Examples include only the beach section of Peach Beach, the Wiggler section of Maple Treeway, or only the courtyard part of Coconut Mall. Battle courses like Funky Stadium and Chain Chomp Wheel were also used for this purpose. A less interesting shakeup that Nintendo probably realized wasn't super exciting, since it didn't appear much after some initial tournaments, was a Grand Prix without item boxes, which usually also forced you to use the Wii wheel for further deviation. This was phased out over time and barely appeared anymore in the later years, and was seemingly replaced by other deviations on Grand Prix and time trials. For the latter, there was driving through the course backwards as fast as possible. Courses used for this purpose include Toad's Factory, Grumble Volcano and Mushroom Gorge. These tracks can actually not be driven backwards in the regular game, so that these tournaments now allow you to do it was definitely fun. And yet, it was still far from the peak of Wi-Fi tournaments. One tier higher, so to speak, I would put what would end up being probably the most common tournament variant of all, a Grand Prix with additional hazards on the track. In fact, the first ever competition from the aforementioned May 2008 was one of this kind. It took place on Wii's Mario Circuit, but now with additional Goombas and Chain Chomps running loose on the track. In December of that year, it returned with a track in Wario's Gold Mine, but now with a huge Wiggler rampaging around the track. It reminds me of something you'd see in custom Mario Kart Wii races, but this was all official. Later on, these kinds of tournaments would only get more and more common. DS Peach Gardens got a tournament that increased the number of Chain Chomps and Monimoles, N64 Sherbet Land got more penguins, Luigi's Circuit with additional Bob-omb cards and its sunset, and Bowser's Castle got a very big upgrade, with more swoopers and thwomps, increased lava activity, and faster revolving fire bars. With Wii Mario Circuit already upped in difficulty, GameCube Mario Circuit couldn't be left behind, so that too got its own dedicated tournament with more Chain Chomps and Piranha Plants. Arguably the coolest of this variety though was a tournament that added Chain Chomps to Rainbow Road, which is of course a reference to N64 Rainbow Road. In a similar camp, albeit ever so slightly different, were the 2 tournaments that randomly added a bunch of mushroom trampolines, as appear prominently on Mushroom Gorge, the tracks that previously had nothing to do with them. These were implemented in Yoshi Falls, across the water in the center, which is super cool, and in Peach Beach, where they replaced the sea, in what you can definitely consider a bit of a weirder move, but still cool. Once again though, this one feels very custom and DIY, with how randomly these mushrooms are placed. But where it really gets cool, the level I really want to see it return in a future Mario Kart title, is the final 2 types of tournaments. First, the raceable battle courses. As early as the second tournament, we would be allowed to take the GBA battle course free and race around it, this one utilizing the numbered gates mentioned earlier. Later installments would go even crazier however. In July 2008, ES Twilight House was turned into an actual full-fledged race course, complete with multiple laps and CPU racers to face off with. This is such a cool idea, and something that has never really returned since, assuming you don't count base Mario Kart 8 reusing race courses for battle maps. N64 Skyscraper received the same treatment a few months later, with even bob-omb cars added as extra hazard. Cookie Land 2 will become a full race later down the line, while Block Plaza and Delfino Pier will become time trial exclusive tracks. The latter was still an incredibly interesting course though, as the water level rose over time, revealing more paths for you to take. In fact, come to think of it, this might very well be the first track in Mario Kart history where all laps aren't identical, a concept that may be completely normal today with Mario Kart Tour and Mario Kart 8's Booster Course Pass using it heavily. This was basically unheard of around the days of Mario Kart Wii. But at least that concept returned later down the line. The same cannot be said for the final type of Mario Kart Wii's tournaments, arguably the one that's the most interesting of them all, the boss battles. The first I want to look at takes place on the battle map Thwomp Desert, which is basically just a circular sandpit with a thwomp dangling over the middle. This was altered for this tournament however, replacing the titular thwomp with a huge pokey, who served as the boss as you might expect. By driving through item boxes, you were supposed to collect bob-ombs, which you could then throw at the segments of the pokey to slowly whittle it down. Touching the pokey or the segments flying about would hurt you and cost precious time. A different kind of boss battle was introduced and used twice later down the line, where one had to race against CPU opponents while they would constantly harm you. First were Donkey and Diddy Kong, who you had to beat while they constantly spammed bananas onto the track. It's fun, it's novel, but it isn't necessarily unique of course. It's a normal race after all, and bananas already exist in this fashion in the main games. The Kongs now just have a limitless supply of them. And so, much cooler was the race against Dry Bowser on N64 Bowser's Castle. Here, Dry Bowser would constantly spit fireballs at you, which is completely unique behavior that isn't possible in the main game. In order to keep things engaging, these opponents had some pretty severe rubber banding, to ensure they were in front of you most of the time. That's definitely where these bosses shine after all. GBA's Shy Guy Beach also had its own boss battle of sorts, but takes things in another direction. No huge enemies or rivals in the card here. Your opponent this time around is an entire herd of sidesteppers. Your goal is to defeat 30 of them using the weapons of your choice, as there are 3 item boxes that will consistently give you stars, triple green shells or bob-ombs, so the decision is all yours. Maybe calling this a boss battle is a bit much, but I felt it suited the category decent enough. One thing that I will admit though is that it pales in comparison to the coolest tournament of them all. It was only the 3rd competition in the game, added in June 2008, and was essentially a tie-in to Super Mario Galaxy, despite that game having been out for nearly a year. This tournament was a full-fledged boss battle, just like the Big Pokey, and took place on the Galaxy Coliseum stage, a completely original course that didn't appear in the base game and has never reappeared since. To be fair, it's nothing spectacular, it's just a circular platform floating in outer space. It's what happens on top of it that's the crazy part. Here you're facing off against several spiky topmen, newly introduced enemies from Super Mario Galaxy that, as the name implies, work like tops and are constantly spinning. By using mushrooms to bump into them, you can knock them off the stage, but they can obviously do the same thing to you, which is where the challenge of this boss battle lies. What's crazy about this though is that the stage isn't the only original thing about this tournament. In fact, everything about it is new. Spiky topmen do not appear in Mario Kart Wii anywhere else. The same goes for the stage, as mentioned before, and the mechanic of knocking one another into the abyss below during a battle. This was also the only tournament that was altered every time it was rerun. So every single tournament appeared a total of 3 or 4 times over the course of Mario Kart Wii's life. But for all but this one, these reruns were identical. The Spiky Topman battle was constantly altered. The first time around, the Spiky Topman appeared in order of 1 solo, then another solo, then finally a duo. But for the second edition, this was changed to 3 duos for a total of 6. The stage would also shrink for the second run around, with segments falling off as the battle progressed. When this tournament later returned for a third time in March 2010, the 6 enemies were retained, but the stage would no longer lose segments over time. What really is the most painful part of all of this is that everything I've just outlined is currently completely inaccessible legitimately. Unique boss battles and essentially new courses have been lost with the shutdown of the Wii's Nintendo Wi-Fi connection more than 10 years ago. The tournaments even kept running for all that time, with the last accessible ones releasing in May 2014, exactly 6 years since the first tournament was released. The chances are very high we will never see this content through official means again, and while understandable, that is certainly a bit of a painful realization. It's a sad note to end on, unfortunately, but it is what it is. So, would you have liked to experience these tournaments for yourself? Or did you actually play them during the years they were available? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Mario content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.